One evening as the sun went down and the jungle fire was burning, down the track came a hobo hiking in. He said, "Boys, I'm not turning. I'm headed for a land that's far away beside the crystal fountains. So come with me, we'll go and see the big rock candy mountains. In the big rock candy mountains, there's a land that's fair and bright, where handouts grow on bushes and you sleep out every night, where the boxcars all are empty and the sun shines every day on the birds and the bees and the cigarette trees, where the lemonade springs, where the bluebird sings in the big rock candy mountain."
Hello, it's me again. I know what you're thinking. A new channel? Weren't you making videos over on Retro Rebound? What happened? Well, YouTube did. You see, the almighty algorithm doesn't seem to enjoy our 3 uploads a week. So Maddie and I talked it over and decided it would be best to upload that 3rd video on a new channel. I'll still occasionally put videos on Retro Rebound, but the weekly ones go here. Won't that initially be bad for views? Yes, but I never claimed to be a smart man. Very much unlike Mr. William G. Fargo and Henry Wells, who in 1852 founded Wells Fargo. This company provided express and banking services to California, which was rapidly growing due to the gold rush. In the beginning, their main function was to transport gold from and to the Philadelphia Mint, but after the Civil War, they took over the last remnants of the Pony Express and the Butterfield Line. This line was a 2,757-mile stretch throughout the American wasteland, starting in St. Louis and going all the way to San Francisco. The Wells Fargo stagecoaches had to be protected along the way from bandits, animals, and the elements so that their cargo would reach the West Coast and back as fast and secure as humanly possible. In northern Texas, which was a significant part of the trail, protection would come from the Texas Rangers. Remember that name. Henry Wells and William G. Fargo were so successful that their company, or bank, is still around to this day with their headquarters still in San Francisco. Roughly 100 years later, in 1962, a descendant of William G. Fargo was born in Long Beach, California. His name? Brian Fargo. When Brian turned 15 years old, his parents got him an Apple II computer and unknowingly set in motion a sequence of events of which the consequences still ripple to this day. You see, while still in high school, young Brian and his friend Michael Cranford wrote and produced their very first video game called Labyrinth of Martagon. Only a few years later, in 1981, they released their first widely distributed graphical text adventure called The Demon's Forge. Brian had big dreams, so in 1983 he started his own development studio and called it Interplay Productions. Brian and his small team started working on their first role-playing game and called it The Bard's Tale, which released in 1985 to much critical acclaim. It spawned 2 sequels, called The Bard's Tale 2, The Destiny Knight, which came out in 1986, and The Bard's Tale 3, Thief of Fate, which released in 1988. That very same year, Interplay Productions also made another RPG, and this one would change the world of video games forever. Wasteland took place in a post-apocalyptic world of 2087, where the global nuclear war of 1998 devastated the entire planet. We play as the Desert Rangers, who take it upon themselves to act as peacekeepers and to protect fellow survivors in the southwest United States. Kinda sounds familiar, right? You'd create 4 characters, but your party could grow up to 7 by recruiting other people you met along the way. What made Wasteland so unique and groundbreaking was that it offered a persistent world. You, as the player, had an actual impact on the world, and the changes you made to it were stored and kept. This is of course what later became the Bethesda staple. It offered a new way of exploration and immersion. The follower had no choice but to resign from his own company. The golden age of CRPGs was over. Or was it? Brian Fargo wasn't just gonna abandon his legacy and roll over. He had come way too far to let the French take over everything he had worked his entire life for. So just like his ancestor William G. Fargo did 150 years earlier, Brian refused to give up. Having been forced out of his own company, but still being loved and having close relations with many former developers and other employees at Interplay, they started calling Brian the leader in exile. Taking many of them with him, Brian founded a new studio, and they didn't have to think about the name for very long. InXile Entertainment was born. Their first few games were new iterations on the same games Interplay got started with all those years ago. So we got the Bard's Tale and the Demon's Forge again, but this time in third person. However, in March of 2012, a Kickstarter campaign began for the sequel to Wasteland. InXile estimated that they needed around $1 million to complete their vision, so Brian Fargo himself pledged $100K of his own money, which is honestly once again proof of what a great leader he is. The Kickstarter, however, became the most successful one the platform had ever seen up until then, and they raised almost $3 million total. Wasteland 2 came out in September 2014 and was a great CRPG. We once again played as the Desert Rangers, traveling all the way from Arizona to LA in an effort to find out what happened to our fellow ranger Ash, who sadly perished. Now, no further spoilers here, but Wasteland 2 was a perfect setup for the one we're talking about today, providing it with many elements and mechanics to refine and making it even better. Once again taking a note from his ancestor William, Brian Fargo founded his own crowdfunding company in 2015 called Fig. They put up a new campaign, and just like its predecessor, an amount of $3 million was quickly raised. Ultimately, over 150 years in the making and spanning multiple generations, the Fargos were finally ready to present their magnum opus. In August of 2020, our COVID-ridden world was made a little bit better by the launch of Wasteland 3. It moved the setting from the desert wastelands of Arizona and LA to the cold, snowy mountains of Colorado. We immediately get presented with a beautiful cutscene giving us a short recap of the previous two games and explaining why the Desert Rangers are suddenly moving to Colorado. Supplies and resources in the West had run dry, but just when things looked most dire, the Rangers got word from a man who called himself the Patriarch of Colorado. If they would come there and meet him to help him out with a personal problem, he'd give Arizona all the food and supplies it needed to rebuild itself and survive. However, when the Rangers get closer to the Patriarch's base, they get ambushed and almost wiped out. And this is where Wasteland 3 begins. We've got an interesting question from our friend Poot over on our Patreon, who asks, I've heard so much glowing praise for Wasteland 3, but I'm completely unfamiliar with the franchise. What are some basic tips you'd give to someone who plans to start with 3 as their entry point? It's very simple. Just go with the flow, because despite this being the third entry, if you've played an isometric CRPG before, you already know how this game operates. And from a story perspective, much like The Witcher 3, Wasteland 3 is a perfect entry point for new players. We get to create 2 rangers who survive the ambush, and you'll immediately notice a striking similarity with that other post-apocalyptic game, Fallout. The special system, called attributes here, basically functions the same way. Some of these attributes will give you more action points or enhance your melee, while others give you better range or better speed. You know the drill. They might be called attributes here, but they're basically the same as the special system in Fallout or basically any other skill point system in any other RPG. We also get to pick a personal background, which elevates some of the skills we're about to get into. You'll basically get a +1 to a particular skill with this background, and it makes the initial game more refined for your character. Personally, I picked the boss background, so I'd get 1 extra point in hard ass, which makes it possible to intimidate people through dialogue options. And that's where we get to the skills. There's so many options to pick from here, ranging from lockpicking to nerd stuff, from automatic weapons to using big guns. Each point gets you a certain percentage and gives you more options during the combat and exploration. Finally, you also get to pick a quirk. And these bring both positive and negative elements to the forefront that make your character truly unique. Now, as I mentioned before, you only get to create 2 of them at the start, and for my second character, I picked the quirk Circus Freak. And this automatically turns your character into a clown, but also gives you faster speed and a higher critical resistance. So as you can see, my little Morty here looks like a clown. After creating our 2 characters, combat immediately begins, and you'll once again notice a striking similarity with Fallout. It's turn-based, and you'll get a set amount of action points based on your skills, which you can then use to move and shoot. Afterwards, if you still have action points left, you can use them to prepare, which means you're taking those points over with you to the next turn, You can take cover, which gives you a defense buff, or you can ambush, which makes you automatically shoot whichever enemy moves first in your line of sight on their turn. And in the beginning, that's basically it. We'll get into the more intricate details of the combat later on, because there's of course a lot more to it once you expand your skill set. After the initial combat sequence, we'll immediately get presented with the excellent and nuanced way choices play out in Wasteland 3. We learn here that this ambush is an act of a clan called the Dorseys, and one of them holds a fellow ranger at gunpoint. Now, one of my characters has points in hard ass and the other one in kiss ass, so we can get around this encounter without any combat. This of course seems like a good option, but just a few minutes later, we found out that the Dorsey that we let go ran back to her friends, told them we were coming. So they execute the hostages they had, which we now can't save anymore. And that is the beauty of Wasteland 3. Every choice has a consequence, which ripples into another consequence, and none of them are black or white, or good or bad. You'll have to constantly think about the big picture. And it was at this point where I realized that Wasteland 3 was a special game. Because when you get into the next combat encounter, the music that starts playing is downright brilliant. I sadly can't let you hear it here or we'll immediately get a strike, but Wasteland 3's soundtrack is filled with Americana through and through. During these battles, rock versions of songs like Blood of the Lamb, Hymn of the Republic, Down in the Valley to Pray, and America the Beautiful play. I can't overstate how this badass music enhances the combat. It's such a great and unique way to touch on the American themes of Wasteland 3, which is essentially a western all about freedom. How to gain it, what to do with it, and how to keep it. Unlike Fallout, which has a more open or global appeal, Wasteland 3 is all about the foundation of the USA. If you're American yourself, or if you're into history at all, I urge you to play it just for those reasons alone. It's so interesting to see what they do with it. Hell, there's even a faction in the game that worships Ronald Reagan, but more on that later. Of course, there are plenty more reasons why Wasteland 3 is so special, which we'll get into right now. Most of the dialogue is displayed in a window at the bottom of the screen, but more important characters get their own cutscene conversations, which really helps with the immersion and gives them some extra personality. As you can see, it doesn't have Baldur's Gate 3 levels of production, but it also doesn't really need it. After we take care of the last remaining Dorseys who ambushed us, we continue our way to Colorado Springs, where we finally meet the man we came here to see, the Patriarch, Saul Buchanan. It immediately becomes clear why this charismatic man asks for our help, because the problem he's dealing with are his own children. Valor, Victory, and Liberty each tried to usurp their father in different ways and fled to different corners of Colorado, plotting their next move. The Patriarch wants us as the Rangers to bring them back into the fold and obviously not kill them in the process. The leader of Colorado first comes off as a great man with a great reputation. Hell, there's a whole museum dedicated to him in the starter town of Colorado Springs, where we get to hear his entire backstory from animatronics. Here, listen to this.
Buchanan a man, oh boy, what a man, the truest of men. Say that again.
However, just like everything and everyone else in Wasteland 3, the Patriarch isn't everything he seems to be at first glance. We quickly learn that he rules Colorado with an iron fist and banks on being feared. He's selfish, has a very short temper, and does unspeakable things to cling to his power. For instance, he sends prisoners to the Godfisher clan who then kill them as ritual sacrifices in order so that they don't attack him or his followers. After a while in the game, we even get a call from a character from the previous game, a fellow ranger called Angela Death, who is set on taking out the Patriarch and seizing control for the rangers themselves. Again, nuance is the name of the game. And Wasteland 3. The Patriarch is not all bad though, because he gives us our own headquarters. And this is a large base, which we can expand throughout the course of the game with our own armory, mess hall, center of operations, infirmary, garage, a prison, and even a few hidden chambers we don't immediately have access to, but that hold secret weapons and armor. In these headquarters, we also get to make 2 extra player-created ranger characters, making the party a total of 4. But you can also recruit various companions, making the full party size 6. You can even go further than that by also recruiting animals, robots, or even a clone. What I personally always do is just create my 2 characters and then leave 4 slots open for companions, so you get the most out of the story. Now this comes with a little caveat because these companions are well written, but they're not really as fleshed out as you might expect them to be from other CRPGs. Their personal stories are more so tied into the main quest instead of being their own separate quests. Take Lucia for instance, who we meet at the start of the game and is worried about her family. We don't really get a choice or a huge backstory here, just that her family went missing during the Dorsey attack. It quickly gets resolved, and so now she might as well stay with us for no other reason really. Companions do give their opinions on the choices you make during the game and have their own personalities and backstories, so they can leave after certain decisions you make they don't agree with. But they don't have sprawling personal quests of their own. One of the more interesting companions is Ironclad Cordite, which is a badass name. Ironclad once opposed the Patriarch and is now imprisoned under his statue in the city center. Angela Death asks us to rescue him and recruit him in her effort to overthrow the Patriarch. Now Cordite is a melee brawler, which plays very differently from the other classes I usually pick. And that's another beautiful thing about Wasteland 3. The classes and skills from your party members all complement each other. For instance, with the skill Nerd Stuff, you can hack robots to turn the tides of battle. A mechanic can use turrets, and the skill Animal Whisperer lets you get a pet, which then gets its own turn during the combat, even though you can't directly control them. Lockpicking of course speaks for itself. Sneaking, combined with the explosive skill, lets you disarm mines, traps, and tripwires and keep them. Weapon and armor modding lets you tinker with your equipment. All these skills are viable, complement each other, and make sure that the combat is varied, diverse, and most importantly, fun. There are so many options to tackle, and if something doesn't work, like you see right here, just try it in a different way. Just like its original predecessor did in 1988, Wasteland 3 offers a persistent world. The choices you make shape it and have huge consequences for every character and location involved. For instance, Lucia's friend who betrays her and basically gets her family killed can either meet her wrath and die, but you could also imprison him in the hope he redeems himself at some point. Again, every choice has a big consequence, whether you immediately see it or not. There's a ton of different factions in Wasteland 3, and some of them support the Patriarch, but others don't. You can't side with everyone, so you have to pick and choose, which will then get you different quests and endings. Do you side with the Patriarch? Do you give it to one of his kids? Or do you take over yourself? Everything is possible. There's the Marshals, who work directly for the Patriarch and are basically cops who keep the peace. But they are also pretty corrupt. Your companion, Quan, is one of them. The 100 families are the nobility of Colorado Springs the first town you get to, and they help the Patriarch gain and keep his power. There's the Wasteland refugees who show up to your base in Colorado Springs searching for a better life. There's the Brygo Syndicate, led by Farron Brygo. Get it? It's Brian. It's Brian Fargo. Usually self-inserts are... He deserves it. He's a great guy. Farron built his own casino in Colorado Springs, appropriately called Little Vegas, but it's up to you, of course, if he gets to keep it or not. There's the Monster Army, led by Flap the Inhaler, who used to be in control of Colorado, and they wear monster masks. They're in control of the Bazaar, a trading hub in Colorado which is experiencing a weird problem with exploding pigs. Like many other locations in the game, you get to decide if the Monster Army gets to keep controlling the Bazaar, or if you'd rather install another faction or someone else there. The Gibbers are probably the most interesting, unique, and hilarious faction, since they worship the god President Ronald Reagan. Yeah, I know, it's weird, but in a good way. Every woman in the Gibbers is called Nancy, after Nancy Reagan. And the Gibbers are in control of the oil in Colorado's wasteland, and also shelter Valor Buchanan, one of the kids. So they're one of your first stops in the main story. No spoilers of course, but like with any faction in Wasteland 3, you can keep the middle road, align yourself with them, or completely wipe them out. There's a reputation system in Order, and a lot of these factions oppose each other. So you're going to have to choose which one of them will be your allies, and which one will be your enemies. You won't be able to appease all of them, and which ones you pick will have a huge impact on the overall story and the ending you get, of which there are several. There are, of course, also a lot of hostile factions you can't even interact with. The Dorseys, who you meet at the start of the game, for instance. But my favorite hostile faction has to be the Los Payasos, a clan made out of clowns. Yes, clowns. Like my dear old Morty the Midget here. They use clown weapons and live in clown environments, which is so stupid and dumb that it actually works. And that's the beauty of Wasteland 3. Comedy is subjective, of course, and can be very hard to nail in games. But Wasteland 3 makes it so that it doesn't harm the more serious notes of the story or the game itself. The comedy is mostly used in dialogue or in character design instead of actual gameplay elements or huge plot points. For instance, one of the staples of the Wasteland games is the skill toaster repair. Of course that's weird and kinda dumb, but it's a viable skill because every time you repair a toaster, there's a chance you'll get a big reward. Another example is we meet an enemy character with a thick Scottish accent, who then turns out to be completely faking it to seem more interesting. We can kill him, or we can imprison him at our headquarters and hear him whine in his fake accent for the rest of the game.
Can't you help me get out of here?
The nuance of the comedy makes it so that the emotional side of the story, or the more dramatic beats, don't get bogged down by lame jokes. It's a tough line to balance, but Wasteland 3 manages to do it perfectly. The world map is entirely covered with snow, so you have to use a truck to get around. You can upgrade this truck with new weapons or horns, and sometimes, when you get ambushed on the map, the truck also becomes a companion you can use as a weapon during the combat. Certain spots on a world map are covered with radiation, so you'll first need to upgrade your truck in your garage at the headquarters. But to do that, you'll first need a crew. Again, everything in Wasteland 3 leads to another thing and into the next one. It all beautifully works together in cohesion. Hell, it even offers full co-op if you want to play through it with a friend. Wasteland 3 truly has it all. Now, like I mentioned before, you gotta remember that this one came out mid-COVID, which was a terrible time for most people. For me, personally, COVID meant that I couldn't visit my dad anymore, who at that point was in full lockdown in a retirement home many hours away in a different country. As the borders closed and old people kept dying without being able to say goodbye to their families, it was all I could think about. Every night at 6 p.m., I would call the home and they would put my dad on, and we both knew we survived another day. That sounds dramatic, but the sense of relief after hearing his voice every day during that call is something I won't be able to explain in common words, and sadly something I'll never be able to experience again. During the day, when I was locked up in my tiny apartment, anxiously awaiting the 6 p.m. call, Wasteland 3 kept me company. It filled me with a sense of wonder, not knowing what would happen next. It would make me laugh, concentrate, and forget about the outside world for a few hours. Maybe that's because CRPGs are my favorite genre, but I think Wasteland 3 is among the best of them. It's not just one thing you can point at and say they did this better or this is an improvement over that game, but it's the entire package. It does almost everything right. The isometric turn-based combat is fun, the story is highly original and interesting, the locations are varied, and the factions you meet offer actual choices with huge consequences that also impact the ending. But the big question, of course, is it better than Fallout? And the answer to that is nuanced, just like the game itself. Wasteland 3 is fantastic, but it lacks the deep, interesting lore, world building, and history the Fallout franchise has. The exploration is minimal, the party interaction is less engaging, there's no vaults, no consistency, and no major threats. And those would all be major issues, if this was an actual Fallout game. I'd say it's a better role-playing game than Fallout 3, 4, 76, and yeah, even New Vegas, but therefore not a better Fallout game, since that series has clearly evolved beyond just being a role-playing game. I mean, there's even a TV show now about it, which I don't think would work for Wasteland. We've got two questions about this, and the first one is from Tanya Rice, who asks, do you think a top-down Fallout game would work today? Would you be okay with that if it were to be? And if so, what state do you think InXile should tackle? Maybe New Orleans, a jazz-style Fallout, or maybe New Vegas, or something crazy with casinos and bar fights. Well, I don't actually think a Fallout isometric RPG would work anymore today, simply because it would be a step back for too many people. Not to me. I'd personally love it. Again, it's my favorite genre, but too many people are not familiar with it or sadly see it as inferior opposed to 3D. even though Baldur's Gate 3 convinced them to finally try it probably. But more importantly is that we don't really need it, since we have Wasteland and a ton of other good sci-fi or post-apocalyptic CRPGs like Underrail, Shadowrun, Adam RPG, Encased, and many more coming in the future. Lee is Cool Jenkins asks, after beating Wasteland 3, is it worth going back and trying the first 2 games? Yes and no. To me, Wasteland 3 is the best of them. It has the most interesting world building, the most interesting quests, locations, and characters, so going back, you might be disappointed to find that the previous games lack a little more in that department. However, that's just an opinion, and I know plenty of people who prefer Wasteland 2 over 3 because of its setting and more hardcore nature. There's a case to be made for both of them, and it's all down to what you prefer. Wasteland 1 got a remaster, but it's still a game from 1988, which is great, but of course the actual gameplay feels dated by now. If you truly love Wasteland 3, give them a go, but I'd also advise you to give Fallout 1 and especially 2 a go if you haven't yet. These games all complement each other, and each one offers unique improvements over the other ones, whether it's gameplay mechanics, story, world building, characters, or combat. What Brian Fargo created back in 1988, which is 9 years before Fallout 1 even came out, is truly astonishing. The man is not only a genius storyteller, but also a visionary. The studios and games that were made under his leadership are all staples of the industry. Now that InXile is part of Microsoft and they have more budget than ever before, I cannot wait to see what they'll do with their next game called Clockwork Revolution. But that's a story for another video. Speaking of which, thank you for reaching the end of this one. It's hard to start a new channel out of nowhere, but I really appreciate you being along for the ride. Next time, we're going to delve deep into a series that's been a bit controversial lately. The reveal of Dragon Age Veilguard was met with mixed reactions, which kinda reminded me a lot of something similar happening in 2011. That's when Dragon Age 2 released, so this seems like the perfect time to see how that one came to be and if it truly is the black sheep of the series. So until then, have a great week, my friends.